Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, CFBNP, and the Veterans Health Administration, Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Education and Training Office. My name is True Lester Pauling. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the right of the screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. This presentation is not available after this webinar, but a handout will be made available with all the resources Ms. Mells will speak about today. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Ms. Lillie Mells for this opportunity and this collaboration. We are grateful for your time today. Mr. Conrad Washington is Director for the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership. Unfortunately, he will not be able to join us today and resents his regrets. Therefore, I will introduce Ms. Lillie Mells, who will be providing today's presentation. Please read a summary of her bio on the screen. Ms. Mells is a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience. She has worked in various capacities to include child abuse, domestic violence, and substance abuse. Lillie is an Air Force veteran and has served as Director of Psychological Health for the Virginia Air National Guard. She has been with the Department of Veteran Affairs since 2013, working in suicide prevention. Currently, she is the Education and Training Program Coordinator at the VA Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. At this time, I give you Ms. Lillie Mells for today's presentation. Lillie?
Thank you, Ms. Pauling. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to bringing this presentation to you. And I want to start off by doing a little bit of a roll call. And so I always like to see who we have on the line. So if you can get ready to type in the chat box. Do we have anybody from the Army on the line? Go ahead and type it in the chat box. Anybody from the Army? What about the Navy? Anybody from the Navy? Okay, I see we got some Navy folks. What about my brothers and sisters in the blue, Air Force? What about the Marines? Anyone from the Marines on the line? Go ahead and type it in the chat box. What about our Coast Guard? I see thumbs up, but I didn't see the chat in the box, the drop in the box, but the Coast Guard. What about our Guard and Reserve? And last but not least, our Space Force. It's in the Q&A box. Same place where you just typed in the question. Okay, so we got a good number of folks on the line, and one of the things about doing the roll call is I always like to acknowledge who's on the line, because I too served, and I will tell you this, once you serve alongside each branch of the armed forces, you tend to have a different perspective, and you know exactly what each brings to the table. So I have a deeper appreciation for all the branches of service, because I served alongside each one. So thank you for your service. And now I'm going to get into our presentation, which is our VA SAVE training. One thing about this training I will say is that suicide can bring up a lot of issues for some people. And if you're having any difficulty listening to the presentation, please take time and step out. If you need to take a break, if you need to talk to someone immediately, you can go ahead and call the crisis line. The crisis line has changed from the 10-digit number to 988, which makes it easily accessible for everyone. The 988 number is the National Crisis Line, so anyone can call. The only difference is that if you press number 1, you're going to get a veteran responder. So keep that in mind. And I know suicide has touched at least everyone's lives in some way, some manner, some form of fashion. And so we're just very sensitive to this topic. So this is what we're going to cover today. Facts about veteran suicide, common myths and realities. VA SAVE steps. This is our introductory suicide prevention training. And then I'm going to go over some resources. And just know that you can use this training to help anyone, not just veterans, even though we're Veterans Affairs, but you can use the information to help anyone. So by participating in this training, you'll have a general scope of the understanding of veteran suicide in the U.S., how to identify someone who is at risk for suicide, and know what to do when you do identify someone at risk for suicide. So my next question to you all is, what are your biggest questions around suicide and talking to people in crisis? What are your biggest questions around suicide and talking to people in crisis? So I want you to think about that, hold your thought, and then hopefully by the end of this training, I would have answered that question for you. So let's go over some facts about veteran suicide. So as far as the VA is concerned, the Department of Veterans Affairs, suicide is a national public health issue. We're actually in a national public health crisis. The number of suicides continue to rise, not only among the civilian population, but they continue to increase among the veteran and military population. And so we know that the numbers are continuing to rise, and so we have to do something. And one of the things is that the VA can't do it alone. That's why we do these community trainings. We can't do it alone. We need your help. It's a whole community help. And so for every death by suicide, there's at least 135 individuals that are impacted. And so when you think about that individual, think about their immediate family, their extended family, the neighborhood they live in, the places that they eat and shop at, if they're working, their coworkers, their colleagues, any other people, associates that they come in contact with at work, if they belong to any civic organizations, if they belong to a church, you can easily get to 135 people. So I would venture to say that it's probably higher than that. But at minimum, we know at least 135 people are impacted. Now, suicide is a complex issue with no single cause. If we knew the cause, we could drill these numbers down, way down. But it's often the result of a complex interaction of risks and protective factors at the individual, community, and societal level. So what are risk factors? Risk factors are those challenges, those obstacles, those things that get in the way from someone's normal functioning. It prohibits them from functioning in a normal way. And when you have increased risk factors, there is usually a likelihood of suicidal behavior. Now, protective factors, these can help offset risk factors. Now, what are protective factors? These are those buffers, those skills, those tools that you can use when you encounter a crisis situation. So to prevent suicide, we have to maximize the protective factors. That means the tools, the skills, the buffers, and minimize the risk factors, those challenges, those obstacles, those things that get in the way. And if we can do that nationwide in communities, we will then drill down the numbers of suicide. So now let's go over some of the individual risks and protective factors. So you see I have this list here, but I will tell you this is not an all-inclusive list. There are many more things that we can put on both sides of this slide. But let's start with the risk factors. Remember what I said, risk factors are those challenges, those obstacles, those things that get in the way of people's normal functioning. So a prior suicide attempt, it definitely puts the individual at risk for suicide. Doesn't mean that someone who's had an attempt will necessarily go on and have another attempt, but it does put them in that category of high risk for suicide because they have attempted. Mental health issues. So when we talk about mental health issues, we're talking about untreated mental health issues. So can any of you drop in the chat box, why do you think people don't seek care for mental health issues? Why do you think people don't seek help? Go ahead and drop it in the chat box. Okay, stigma, absolutely. Anything else? Because there's quite a few reasons. Shame, pride, absolutely. Absolutely. Those are all good answers. And I will tell you, there's a few other things, reasons why people don't seek mental health care. Some of it, access to care. Some of it, culture. If you grew up in a culture where mental health was never discussed or acknowledged, there's a likelihood that you won't seek help. And then for those that served in the military, while you were in, People were afraid to go to their leadership. People are afraid of losing security clearances, top secret clearances. So there's many reasons why people don't seek mental health care. And in the broader spectrum, mental health care has not been given the same latitude as some other disorders. So you can see people addicted to drugs, smoking weed, getting high, drinking alcohol, being functional alcoholics. But as soon as you say that someone is bipolar or schizophrenic, they can be blackballed. So mental health has not been given the same platform as some other disorders. Next, substance abuse. As I already mentioned, drugs and alcohol. So anytime you engage in ingesting a mood-altering substance, it puts you at risk for suicide. So anytime you engage in ingesting a mood-altering substance, it puts you at risk for suicide because your judgment is off, your rationale is off. Next, access to lethal means. When we talk about access to lethal means, we're talking about stockpiling medication. Some people own samurai knives. Some people own firearms. So anytime you have access to lethal means, it puts you at a greater risk for suicide than someone who doesn't. Next, recent loss. When we talk about recent loss, this could be a combination of things. It could be loss of limb, loss of sight, loss of a loved one, loss of a job. So anytime you're experiencing great loss, it definitely puts you at risk for suicide. Next, legal or financial challenges. And legal challenges, especially when there's a possibility of facing jail time. Just the mere thought of going to jail can put someone at risk for suicide. Financial challenges when we're looking at bankruptcy, and some people even end up in jail because of financial issues, embezzlement, and those kinds of things. But it definitely puts you at risk for suicide. Next, relationship issues. Now, I will tell you, relationship issues is huge, and it's probably one of the top issues in terms of risk factors for suicide. And we're talking about failed relationships. So when we see failed relationships, divorce, breakups, it puts you at risk for suicide. And I'm sure you have seen in the news and maybe on TV where there have been relationships that have dissolved and you will see a murder suicide. So folks are definitely at greater risk for suicide when they have a failed relationship. Next, unemployment. So when you're unable to support yourself or your family, definitely puts you at a greater risk for suicide. And then homelessness. And as I said earlier, there are many more things that we can put on that list as far as risk factors, but we just wanted to put down a few. Now let's move over to the protective factors. Now go back to the definition, protective factors. These are buffers, they're skills, they're tools that you can use when faced with a crisis. So access to mental health care. So someone who's receiving treatment for mental illness is definitely going to do better than someone who's not receiving care at all. Now, clearly, there are some mental health disorders that people can function for a lifetime without being suicidal or receiving any treatment. Anxiety is one of them. Depression is one of them. There's some people who have been depressed their whole life and they have never attempted suicide. But there are some mental health disorders that require ongoing treatment and in most cases, medication therapy as well. So when we talk about things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, phobias, these are disorders that require follow-up care and medication therapy. And if you're not following up with care and medication therapy, chances are that person is going to be at risk for suicide. Next, sense of connectiveness. So when we talk about sense of connectiveness, think about when you served in the military, when you had that uniform on, and when you were behind those gates. It's a sense of connectiveness, being in a community that pretty much takes care of each other. You're behind those gates, you're assigned to a unit. The unit has their own distinction. Some units have their own call signs. It's a brotherhood and a sisterhood that you engage in. And so sometimes when you don't have that connectedness, it kind of leaves folks a little bit empty. But when you're involved in the military, it's a community within a community. We have our own cleaners, We have our own grocery stores, which is the commissary. We have our own shopping, which is the exchange. We have bowling alleys, theaters, pools, all kinds of things, churches, libraries, everything that you can name is on that installation. And so that's why you have that sense of connectedness. You really don't even have to leave if you don't want to. Okay. Banks, gas stations, fast food restaurants, everything is there. Next, problem solving skills. Now, I will tell you, many of us did not have problem solving skills at all growing up. And I can tell you, I grew up in New York City, and there weren't a whole lot of problem solving skills that we had. And so, if we didn't have problem solving skills, what do you think we did? What do you think we did instead of using problem solving skills? So many people used their fists and they fought. They fought because they didn't have problem solving skills and they felt that that was the only way to solve problems. But I will tell you, it's not a good way to solve problems. You can't just fight your way through life. And people who fought a lot as children, you see them fight a lot as adults. And not necessarily physical fighting, but it turns into verbal fighting. And so if we learn problem solving skills younger, we tend to do better as adults. And if you have problem solving skills, you tend to be able to do better during crisis situations. Okay. Next, sense of spirituality. Now, this is very individualized. Some people will actually go to a formal house of worship. Some people will pray. Some people will meditate. It just depends on what's going to work for that individual, but it can be a positive protective factor. Next, mission or purpose. When you have a mission or purpose, it gives you a reason to get up every day and to complete something. You know, many folks, when they return from deployment, they weren't quite sure what their mission or purpose was anymore, you know. And even when you leave the military, you know exactly what the mission is of the military. And then you come home to civilian life and people see the world very different than the way you see it. And so sometimes it's always not clear as to what your mission and purpose is. But if you have a mission and purpose, you tend to do better than someone who doesn't. Physical health. There's nothing worse than walking around in physical pain every single day. And so for many who served in the military, we ignore a lot of pain. We ignored ailments, injuries, and just pushed through it. And then when we retired or got out of the military, we realized that we had all these issues that should have been taken care of, but we were so used to pushing through it. But there's no need to continue to push through it. We should really be taking care of our health, getting treated for those injuries and ailments that we have been, pushing off, brushing off for long periods of time. So when you're in good physical health, you tend to do better than someone who's not. Next, employment. When you're gainfully employed, it's always a positive protective factor because that means that you can support yourself and your family. There's nothing worse than going home and not being able to feed your children and looking in their eyes and knowing that they're hungry and you can't feed them. So that's not a good position to be in. So anytime you have gainful employment, it's definitely a positive protective factor. And then social and emotional well-being. So when we talk about social and emotional well-being, we're talking about getting involved in causes and things that are fulfilling. And you'll see a lot of veterans. That's why we work for a lot of federal agencies, especially helping agencies, because we want to continue the mission. We want to continue to help our fellow veterans. And so you'll see a lot of veterans employed at Veterans Benefits, Veterans Health Administration, and just a lot of different federal agencies because we want to continue that. And so, like I said earlier, it's not an all-inclusive list, but this is a good list of risk factors and protective factors. Next, when we look at lethal means. So the number one lethal means that's being used by veterans and civilians is firearms. So if you look at the red, look on the veteran side, over 72% of veterans are using firearms as a lethal means method. If you look at all of the other methods combined, they don't even come close. They don't even come close. Poisoning, suffocation, and other can be a variety of things. It's just that the percentage is too small to get a category by itself. But it could be jumping from a height or ramming a vehicle into a fixed object. But clearly, firearms is the #1 method that's being used. And when you look at the non-veteran side, same thing. Over 52% of non-veterans are using firearms as a lethal means. And so one of the things that the VA had to do was educate more on lethal means safety and storage. And so if a veteran was at the VA, and let's say that they were suicidal and they owned a weapon, what would happen is that we would notify the authorities and the weapon would be removed and that individual would never get their weapon back. And what we found in that method is that it really didn't work, because then people began to be not as honest about owning a weapon because they knew that it was going to be confiscated. And so we had to change the dialogue in that. And so what we did is went back and said, okay, if you're in a crisis, can we get you to safely store that weapon? Give the key or lockbox to a trusted adult or friend or relative who's over the age of 21. And once you get through that crisis, we can give it back to you. And that seemed to work much better than just confiscating the weapon and the person never getting it back again. So we've done more education, not only with the veteran, the family members, and the providers who serve them. Because also we found that a lot of providers, they have never handled weapons. And so they don't know what it means or feels like to own a weapon or have your weapon confiscated indefinitely. So what does lethal mean safety? So in the context of suicide prevention, safe storage and lethal means is any action that builds in time and space between a person with thoughts of suicide and a suicide method. So I'll repeat that. Any action that builds in time and space between a person with thoughts of suicide and a suicide method. And that's our goal, to build in the time and space. And so that's why when we hand out materials and resources, all of our emergency crisis line numbers is on those materials. And maybe that split second that person will think before they decide to do anything that they would call that number. So we have them on pillboxes, we have them on wallet cards, we have them on magnets, we have them on towels, we have them on display in the numerous items, and so that they can see that number and maybe before they decide to do something they will call. And an effective lethal means safety education and counseling is collaborative, as I mentioned earlier. We educate not only the veteran, their family members, and the providers who serve them. And so when it's collaborative, it's veteran-centered, and it respects the important role that firearms and medications play in a veteran's life. And if we're consistent with that, then we probably have helped prevent suicide for the rest of their lives. So most suicidal crises are brief. Time from decision to action is usually less than 1 hour. So if you look at some of the samples that we've done here, less than 5 minutes, 24%, less than 20 minutes, 48%, and within an hour, 71%. But the interesting thing that you need to note about this slide is that look at the firearm injury. 85 to 90% fatalities is when a firearm is used. All other methods combined, it's only a 5% fatality. So we know this is where we had to foot stomp our education on lethal means and lethal means safety. Now, lethal means safety, it does work, and reducing access to lethal suicide methods is one of the few population interventions that has been shown to decrease suicide rates. And so that's a good thing. And about 90% of people who survive an attempt do not necessarily go on to die by suicide. So that's another good thing. And so if we collaborate ahead of time with the veterans and their providers, we have likely prevented suicide. Now, suicide is preventable. Now, I'm not sure if people are able to type in the chat, but I'm going to ask a couple of questions and see if you can type your answer in the chat. If you can't type your answer in the chat, then I'm going to ask you to do a thumbs up. So we're going to go over some common myths and realities. Okay. Common myths and realities. So in the Q&A box, see if you can type in your answer. People who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. Is that a myth? I want you to type it in the Q&A box. People who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. Is that a myth or reality? You can type it in the Q&A box. Okay, I see thumbs down for Myth? Any thumbs up for reality? Okay. It's a myth because no matter how casually or jokingly said, suicide threats should never be ignored and may indicate serious suicidal thoughts. So someone who talks about suicide provides others with an opportunity to intervene before that behavior occurs. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say you have a friend named John. John works 2 buildings down from you. Today you decide that you're going to go to lunch with John. You're going to meet at 12 o'clock outside the building and you're going to walk to a restaurant. So you meet up with John, you're walking, and John says to you, I'm over this freaking divorce. I'm sick of the lawyer. I'm going to have to give up my house. I'm going to have to give up the vehicle. I won't be able to see my kids every day. I'm only going to be able to see them on the weekend occasionally. I'm going to have to pay child support. I'm going to have to pay alimony. I'm so sick of this freaking divorce. I could just walk in front of that bus. Now, clearly, John is overwhelmed. John has all these things that are going on. And although he may not have any intent or plan to actually walk in front of that bus, clearly he's giving you an opportunity to intervene. And that's what you want to be able to do. Myth or reality? The only one who can really help someone who is suicidal is a mental health counselor or therapist. Is that a myth or reality? The only one who can really help someone who is suicidal is a mental health counselor or therapist. You can type it in the Q&A box, or you can give a thumbs down if you think it's a myth. You can give a thumbs up if you think it's reality. Okay. I see quite a few myths. Okay. It's a myth because special training is not required to safely raise the subject of suicide. So helping someone feel included and showing genuine heartfelt support can also make a big difference during a challenging time. So clearly, your friend John, he is going through a challenging time. So being able to support him and find out what's going on, how can you help him? Okay. And like I said, even though he said, I could just jump in front of that bus, he may not actually have a plan or intent to jump in front of that bus, but he's giving you the opportunity to intervene. And that's what you want to be able to do. Now let's go over the steps of S.A.V.E. And so, as I said earlier, this is the VA's introductory level suicide prevention training. So it's going to help you act with compassion if you encounter someone in a suicidal crisis. So S, signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized. A, ask the most important question of all. So I'm going to pause here for a second. And if you can type in the Q&A box, what's the most important question of all that you should be asking when you encounter someone in a suicidal crisis? What is the most important question of all that you should be asking an individual that you encounter in a suicidal crisis? Go ahead and type it in the Q&A box. Okay. So I see a few questions in there, but I'm not going to give you the answer just yet. When I get to A, I'll give you the answer. D, validate that person's experience. E, encourage treatment and expedite getting help. So we're going to start with S, signs of suicidal thinking. Learn how to recognize these warning signs. Now go back to John, that example I gave to you. He sounded hopeless about his situation. He felt like there was no way out of his situation. He may not have had anxiety, but we definitely saw some agitation in there. He's feeling like there was no reason to live. He was kind of angry. He had all of these red flags that were going on. So clearly, this is someone that we should intervene on. So anxiety, what is anxiety? That feeling of nervousness, something's about to happen, you're not sure what, you're not sure who, you're not sure when. It's like walking on eggshells every day. Some people have physical symptoms, some people feel nauseated, some people have sweaty palms, some people have a racing heart rate, some people actually have a full-blown panic attack. So anxiety is real. It is real, and it can incapacitate folks, okay? And so when you have that, you can have suicidal thoughts, agitation, sleeplessness, or mood swings. Now, rage and anger. When we talk about rage and anger, one thing we know about rage and anger is that generally it's a mask for something else. And when you pull back the layers of rage and anger, you can usually find some mental illness beneath that. It could be PTSD, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be a number of things. But generally, when you pull back the layers of rage and anger, you will find that there's some mental illness there. And the reason we tend to see more rage and anger, especially in our males, because our males are taught that, it's not okay to cry and show certain emotions, but it's very acceptable to be angry and be in a fit of rage. And most of this is because it's a learned behavior. They learn it very early on, and it just continues to progress as they get older. Because for our males in society, you have to be macho. You have to suck it up. You can't show any weakness. You can't cry. And so if you can't do any of those things, it's easier to just hold it back and just be in a fit of rage and anger. Okay? You'll see it in some women too, but not nearly as much. Next, engaging in risky activities without thinking. So you probably have seen a lot of that just around town. I've seen people on motorcycles, no helmets, high rates of speed. One thing, I was in Florida recently, and I didn't realize that they don't have a helmet law. So you can be on a motorcycle or a bicycle without a helmet. And I thought, wow, but there are some risky activities out there, and especially on these highways and byways, because people are very angry on the roads, road rage, people weaving in and out of traffic, driving at high rates of speed. So there's a lot of risky activities going on out there. Next, increasing alcohol and drug use. Now remember, anytime you ingest mood-altering substances, it puts you at risk for suicide because your rationale is off. You're just not thinking coherently. Then withdrawing from family and friends. Our family and friends tend to see us more, and when we look different, they tend to notice it quicker than someone who doesn't know us at all. It's just like if you are a very neat person and you come to work every day in a suit and tie, and then all of a sudden today you come in and your shirt is wrinkled, you don't have on a tie, your pants are wrinkled, there's something going on. We would notice that. We would notice that. But if wrinkle is your everyday wear, nobody would really notice it. Next, signs of suicidal thinking. So the presence of any of the following signs required immediate attention. So thinking about hurting or killing oneself. Looking for ways to die. And believe me, there's 1,000,001 thing that you can do to the 10th power, okay? Never leave a suicidal person alone. An empty room is never an empty room, believe me. People have made attempts on inpatient psychiatric wards that are supposed to be sanitized. So people can find things. So don't leave them alone. Talking about death, dying, or suicide. Go back to John. I could just jump in front of that bus. And like I said, he may not have had a plan or intent, but this is your opportunity to intervene. Self-destructive and risk-taking behaviors, especially when it involves alcohol, drugs, and weapons. Think about this scenario. Somebody's depressed. They don't like feeling depressed. Depression, that sadness, no motivation, no interest in doing anything. Some people sleep all day. Some people can't sleep at all. Some people eat all day. Some people can't eat at all. But most people don't like that feeling. And so for some people, they want to get rid of it. And so they either get high or drink, figuring that they can just drink away their issues. The problem is that once you start drinking or getting high, then you're thinking irrationally. And let's say that same individual owns a weapon and they decide, oh, maybe I want to clean my weapon. But they're so depressed and so out of it, maybe I just want to use my weapon, so you're not thinking rationally. And this is just general. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it's just a general. Next, asking the question. So know how to ask the most important question of all. So I'm going to go back and look at those answers that were put in there. Okay. And so someone said, let me see. Are you thinking of harming yourself? That was one of the questions that was asked. And so I will tell you this. Do you have a plan? That was another question that was asked. But this is the question that you should be asking when someone is in a suicidal crisis. Are you thinking about killing yourself? This is the question that you want to ask, and you want to ask it in this manner. Because you see, if you say, are you thinking about harming yourself? Well, harm can mean different things to different people. And so you want to make sure that you're being direct because you don't want any confusion about the answer that they're going to give you. You see, because I could stub my toe on the end of the table and I could hurt myself, you know? So hurt and harm could mean two different things for different people. So this is the question that you want to ask, and you want to be able to ask it in that way. Now, there are some things that you want to take into consideration when you do ask that question. So you want to ask that question if you've identified those warning signs and symptoms. Go back to John. What did we identify? We identified that he was angry. We identified that there was a relationship loss. He was going through a divorce. He was not going to be able to be near his children. He was going to be uprooted from his home. He's going to have financial problems. We were able to identify several red flags on John. And then he said, I could just jump in front of that bus. So definitely, this is somebody that you want to intervene with. Okay. And do ask the question in a natural way that it flows with the conversation. So now if John, the same John had came to you and said, hey, yeah, and I'm going through this divorce. It's a lot of work, but it's just something that we have to do. We're not getting along. I'm going to move out the house so that the kids can go to the same school and they can still be around their friends. I won't be able to see them every day, but I will get them twice a month, and I'll have them 4 holidays out of the year. I'll have to pay child support, but I want to take care of my kids, so I want to make sure that they're taken care of. And if you say to John, are you thinking of killing yourself? Well, guess what? That didn't quite flow with the conversation that you were having with John. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem frustrated that, he was going to have to pay child support and move out the house and all these things. And so you can definitely, intervene and ask him how he's doing. But in that particular scenario, he didn't appear to be in a crisis. Okay. Next, don't ask the question as though you're looking for no answer. So these are things that you don't want to do. If you ask the question looking for a no answer, then guess what? You're going to get a no answer. So if you say to John, you're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? Well, guess what? If you say you're not thinking, you've already answered the question for him. So never answer the question with a no answer. Okay? So that's why you want to ask John, are you thinking of killing yourself? Okay? And that way he can answer you honestly. I'll give you another example of that. My daughter, you know, anytime she wants to do what she wants to do, she just doesn't. If I don't want her to do it, then I'll say, Nicole, you're not doing that today, are you? And if I say you're not doing that today, that means I'm telling her she's not doing it. If I wanted her to do it, then I would say, what are you doing today? So it's all in the way that you ask the question. You have to ask it in a way that they're going to give you an honest answer. And don't wait to ask the question when someone is halfway out the door. So if you're having lunch with John and he told you this, and now lunch is over and you've got 5 minutes to get back to work, John, are you going to kill yourself? You have to give yourself enough time to intervene and help John. Okay. And so as early as you find out, that's the earliest that you want to go ahead and intervene. V, validate that person's experience. I will tell you this, the most important thing that you can do is validate people. When you validate people, you make them feel like they're important, their opinion matters, they matter. And it's just an overwhelming feeling when you validate someone. And so an example of this would be, a couple of years ago, I saw a news story of a little boy who was with his grandmother, and they were coming from either Home Depot or Lowe's, I'm not sure which one. And as they were pulling out of the parking lot, he's in the back seat. He must have been about 5 years old. And grandma is driving. She makes the right to get out of the parking lot. And he says, Grandma, um, we need to go and help that man that's dying. And she says, say what? He says, we need to help the man that's dying. You need to go back and help him. And she says, sit down. And I will tell you, that's probably one of those sit down and be quiet. Children should be seen and not heard. So he was very insistent. He said, but Grandma, you need to help him because if you don't go back and help the man, he's going to die. And she only got maybe like half a block, whatever, but he kept insisting. And she finally turned to him and said, sit down. There is no man that's dying. And he said, Grandma, that's not right. You're just going to let that man die. And so she got so frustrated, she turned around and went back to the parking lot. And lo and behold, there was a man who had collapsed. The little boy saw the man collapse in the parking lot. Now, for me, what really hit home was when the news reporters went to interview this little boy. And if you could just see the glow on his face when he was validated, because he was validated that he saw something and someone finally believed him. They finally heard him. Because typically we don't listen to people. We really don't. And so when you validate someone, you really make them feel like they're important, they matter, and their opinion matters. And so when you validate people, you've gone a long way. You want to talk openly about suicide, be willing to listen, and let that person express their feelings. Many times when people are in a crisis, they just need to be able to vent and express what's going on. Far too often, we've been told to shut up. I know I can remember as early as maybe 5 or 6 years old, the first time I was told basically to shut up because children should be seen and not heard. And so for some people, their whole lives, they've been told, be quiet, we don't want to hear you. And they're in a crisis and they want to be heard. So allow that person to express their feelings. Recognize that the situation is serious because it is serious. Don't pass judgment. One thing we know about human beings is that we can easily pick up when we're being judged. And it's a turn off. And if you want to turn somebody off really quick, start judging. And it's a quick turn off. Reassure them that help is available because help is available. So you want to be able to reassure them of that. E, encourage treatment and expedite getting help. So what should you do if someone is in a suicidal crisis? Don't keep it a secret. This is not the type of secret that we want to keep, okay? Even if the person swears you to secrecy and don't say anything, this is not the type of secret you want to keep. And people will get upset and all that, but if you save their life, eventually they'll come around and thank you for it. Don't leave him or her alone. As I told you earlier, an empty room is not an empty room. Don't leave him or her alone. Try to get the person to seek immediate help from his own doctor or the nearest emergency room. Call 911 if you have to. Okay? Reassure them that help is available because help is available. And if it's a veteran, you can call 911 if they're in immediate danger, and then you can call the crisis line right afterwards. Dial 988, give them the same report. Because for the veterans crisis line, they're going to follow up, regardless of who makes contact with that veteran. They're going to continue to follow up. When talking with a veteran that's at risk for suicide or anyone who's at risk for suicide, the first thing you want to do is remain calm. Don't get all excited. It's not going to help the situation. Try to remain calm. Listen more than you speak. Remember what I said. Allow that person to speak, allow them to vent, allow them to express themselves. Maintain good eye contact. The worst thing in the world is when you're talking to someone and their attention is somewhere else. Then you feel like you're dismissed, you're not important. So maintain good eye contact. Act with confidence. You may not know everything to do, but you can certainly put forth confidence. Don't argue with that individual. There are so many topics that we can argue over. It's a no-win situation. Everybody has their heels dug in. It's a no-win situation. Religion, politics, abortion, TikTok, we could go on for days. It's a no-win situation. Use open body language. Don't be like Macaulay Culkin on Home Alone with the shocked face. Limit your questions. Let that individual do the talking. Use supportive and encouraging comments, but be honest that there's no quick solution, but help is available. Because that's the truth. There's no quick solution, but help is available. So that was your S.A.V.E training. Signs of suicidal thinking should be recognized. Ask the most important question of all, and that question is, are you thinking of killing yourself? Validate that person's experience. Let them know that they matter, their opinion matters. Encourage treatment and expedite getting help. Now I'm going to go over some of the resources that we have available. So here we have the Veterans Crisis Line. Anybody can call this number, 988. It has changed 2 years ago from the 10-digit number to 988. And it's also the national crisis line. The only difference is if it's a veteran or active duty service member, you press 1. They're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we also have chat service and text service available. The crisis line was stood up in 2007 and has been going strong ever since. We've had over 7 million phone calls, over 900,000 chats, over 360,000 texts, and over 1.4 million referrals, and over 313,000 dispatch of emergency services. And so when we talk about dispatch of emergency services, an example of that would be somebody call the crisis line and say, I'm going to kill myself, and right now, they're going to dispatch emergency services immediately. And that crisis line is still going to take that information, if it's a veteran, and do a consult to our suicide prevention coordinators. And those coordinators have 24 hours to reach out to that individual, irregardless of what the disposition is. Even if they're hospitalized in the community, they still have 24 hours to reach out to that individual. Now, if the person calls and just says, I'm having these thoughts, but I don't want to hurt myself, I just need help, the crisis line will safety plan with that individual. They will also send a referral to the suicide prevention coordinator, and they still have 24 hours to reach out to that individual. We have each VA medical facility has at least one suicide prevention coordinator. In some cases, they have more than one, just depending on how large the area is. And they also have a team that works with them, case managers and other admin folks. And they're responsible for direct care, monitoring and oversight, reporting and tracking, and outreach. VeteransCrisisLine.net, this is a resource where you can locate any VA medical facility, our vet centers, and our community-based outpatient clinics, as well as the suicide prevention coordinator. All you got to do is put in your city and zip code and check off which ones you're trying to locate, and the list will come up. Don't wait, reach out. This is a one-stop shop for veterans. You go on this website and it says explore resources. Once you click on that, then you pick the resources that you need: education, medical care, housing. And once you press enter, then one consolidated list will come up. Making the connection. These are vignettes of veterans giving their story about mental health and their issues with mental health and how they sought treatment at the VA, and they're giving their testimony of how it helped them. Practice secure storage of firearms, medication, and other lethal means. And so this is information that we've been partnering with several agencies. NSSF is one, National Sports and Shooting Foundation. They have placed our crisis line information on their site and at their conferences. And so it's been a good partnership getting that information out there. New lethal means safety resources. As I mentioned earlier, we've educated not only the veteran, their family members, as well as the providers who serve them. LGBTQ, the VA has been open to helping all our veterans, and so we do have LGBTQ coordinators available. Mental health apps. These are apps that are free. You can go online and download them. Only thing I suggest is that you use the apps in conjunction with your therapist. They're not made for treatment alone. The new safety plan app, I have the pleasure of working on this app with the National Center for PTSD. This is an app where an individual can have on their phone. Safety plan is a written list of things that a person can do, coping strategies when they're in a crisis. And so you have all that listed on there and easily accessible on their phone. So it's a good app. Next, Uniting for Suicide Postvention. We don't talk about postvention a lot. However, tragedies do happen in the workplace and in the community, and we have to be prepared. And so our MyRec has postvention resources, and they're all available for free. PsychArmor, this is one of our partners that has our training online. We're in the process of updating it, but you can go online and take this training 25 minutes. All you have to do is just register, and the training is free. And they also have some other trainings on there like military culture And so it's just a good training that can be used in the community. And then stay connected. So we are online. And so if anyone wants to stay connected with us, they can. And so now I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I'll turn it back over to Ms. Pauling.
Thank you so much, Lillie, for that wealth of information as always. We so much appreciate you being with us today, and I'm so thankful for your presentation and for your knowledge of the subject. We do have a few questions in the Q&A that we will go ahead and address at this time. I will read the name of the person and their question out loud, and Ms. Mells will provide a response. If we are unable to get around to all the questions today, we do have your email and we'll get directly back to you. First question comes from Christian Frazier, and she said that she is a mental health first aid instructor for veterans. How can I get certified to teach S.A.V.E?
Well, we don't really certify people to teach S.A.V.E. This is a training out of the VA. And so what I would do is get with your local suicide prevention coordinator. You can go on that resource website and put in a name and talk with that person there for your community. Because we do have suicide prevention coordinators and we have community engagement coordinators. And part of their job is to go out and do this training in the field. But I would talk to them and see what they could do for you. But there's no certification per se.
Thank you, Ms. Frazier, for that question. Our second question comes from Andreas Brawling. What number is that again? Vet crisis line?
988, that's the national crisis line. The difference is for veterans, you dial 988 and then number 1. Everybody else, you just dial 988 and hold the line and a responder will get to you. So it went from the 10-digit number, which was the 1-800-273-8255, down to 988 to make it easily accessible for those who don't have, regular phones and just, those living in the elements, easy number to remember.
Yeah, so that number 988 makes a big difference. So easy for everyone to remember that. The third question comes from Edwin Figueroa. I am involved in a proposal to contribute to the prevention and reduction of suicide among war veterans from a technological arena. Do you think it has national importance and would be valued?
Well, I don't know what your project is, but the VA does have grants that they do give out. You just have to look on their webpage and find out when they're taking in applications for that. But they do have different technology grants that they do every year.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mells. Fourth question is coming from Gary Hardy. How do you engage leadership to implement suicide prevention training as a part of their wellness training?
Well, I'm not really sure what leadership you're talking about because it does exist already in the Department of Veterans Affairs as well as DOD. So if you're talking about private agencies, I think really starting with their health and wellness component of their agency and, starting there because it's about the employee health and wellness. So I would say definitely starting there.
That was the last question, Ms. Mells. If anyone else has any more questions to ask Ms. Mells, please forward your question and we'll make sure that she gets it. If you need to reach out to her, please see her point of contact information on the screen here. You can also reach out to our team for any information or her point of contact as well. If you registered for this event or this webinar, we will provide you with today's resources. A recording of this webinar will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and sharing of information. Thank you again, Ms. Lillie Mells, for your fantastic presentation, always engaging and always supportive. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.